the fun part.
All the tech.
Yeah, it says it's good. Should be good. All right. Quick sip. Welcome back to Unique Minds of the Okanagan. I'm Rob O'Day, and we are on location in Kelowna with Rob McLaren, a multi-instrumentalist from Kelowna. How you doing?
Yeah, good.
It's good to have you.
Yeah,
Thanks for being on here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So let's get started, and basically, why don't you let everybody know who you are, where you're from, and how you became such a creative musician.
That's probably worth an hour in itself. Rob McLaren, as you mentioned. I'm from a little town called Tofield, Alberta. I had one of those weird childhoods where most of my life was spent there, but my dad lived out here in the Okanagan. And then I kind of like live with him during the summer and go back home during the rest of the time. And when I graduated, I moved out here just because there was clearly way more going on. I don't know, with being a musician, I don't know. I've kind of feel like music has kind of always possessed me. Like there's like these weird moments that my mom always brings up. Like when I was a kid, whenever I'd see live music, it was like I would become entranced and be taken over by a spell. She loves telling this story of like, we were at West Edmonton Mall on Halloween, and there was a band playing in West Ed, and I was dressed as a little bunny, and I lost it, and I started dancing, and everyone made a circle around me, and there's just this like little 2-year-old doing this frantic 2-year-old dance, just entranced by the music. And there's even like a newspaper clipping from a Camrose jamboree that my mom took me to, that the same thing happened. The band was playing and I just like lost it and started weird dancing, 7-year-old weird dancing. And somebody actually shot that as part of the story about the jamboree that they have there every year. Back then they did. But for as long as I can remember, it was just something that like, the longer and longer I think about it, music just has always like possessed me. Like it kind of takes me over. And I've started to kind of understand that it's like not really a choice. It's hard to come to terms with that.
Yeah.
It's hard to, I think we all want that sovereignty. Like this time of year, I always go through that thing where as a Canadian musician, songwriter, you're on the road less in the winter. And it's kind of that time to recenter, refocus, look at those hard things, those hard challenges that were your limitations during the summer. And, but you also slow down and, you have time with your family and your friends, and you have time to reflect. And that's usually always the time that like, I'm like, why am I doing this? Like it's very hard. I have 2 small children, and, I can't help but think like it's so much better just being at home with them than to, drive 2 towns over to play to 6 people, and I've known so many musicians that give themselves, so many artists that give themselves that permission to step away. And it kind of reminds me of like, religious people. They always say like, oh, why do people only pray to God when their life is bad, right? And I've learned my lesson as a musician and as an artist. You can't.
Yeah.
There's a conviction there. You don't have a choice. Yeah. And I've tried to put it down. I've tried to step away from it because it gets really disheartening,
Yeah.
And the project that I'm currently in, the Cavernous, it's there's been a long running thing with me. I feel I've done everything from like folk music to electronica to heavy metal, but everything that I do, and you probably can testify to this because we've known each other so long, but everything that I do is this subversion, right? It's metal, but it's not
Yeah.
just metal. It's folk, but it's not just folk.
Yeah, there's always a Rob McLaren feel
Right.
to whatever you're in.
Well, I think that there's a way to be very specific about what you're doing and still be conserve what's great about that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, one of my guiding lights is Slayer, and Slayer is metal.
Yeah.
But they're still very much Slayer. There's no one that sounds like Slayer. Slayer is Slayer, right?
Yeah.
But they're still heavy metal. Whereas I think there's that other thing, more like a David Bowie, where it's like, you're not just, like David Bowie approached every album as a different character,
Mm-hmm.
right? And like, not just that, but he dipped his feet into like musicals and, movies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I'm a little more of a David Bowie. And so whenever I come at whatever I'm doing, I'm always trying to find, as you mentioned, that Rob McLarenism that is usually a subversion. And I've realized like I get so down and out because my projects take so long to connect with people. Like I have to just really grind at it for people to be like, oh, that's what you're doing.
There's a spiritual element to the music that you write and the bands that you've been in.
Yeah.
There's artists, and like you said, there's bands.
Yeah.
And then there are artists.
Yeah.
Musicians and artists are on a different plane. And I think of what you deliver when, not only with what you write, but how you perform.
Yeah.
I can say hands down, you're probably one of the only artists that's ever like captivated me in a trance state while watching you perform.
Yeah.
Because you're so into the music that it makes the viewer almost connect on a different level than just watching someone play their songs that they've practiced a long time. There's a feel to what you deliver.
Right.
And I think through over the like D.F.Y, Lakeman, even the Sunday morning string bands, like there's a unique aspect to whatever you've created. Even when there's other people adding to it, because D.F.Y had its own, like in my eyes, D.F.Y is probably one of the greatest bands to ever come out of the Okanagan.
Thank you. Wow.
The music you guys wrote was next level, and I feel it's always ahead of its time.
Yeah.
I feel like that's what it comes down to, is just it's so ahead of it.
Yeah.
It's like 2 years later people are realizing,
Right.
like, oh cool, like you can make electronic music with our like bands.
Yeah.
Cavernous has been on that for a while.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like people obsessed over Tool, and D.F.Y I always said was like Canada's Tool. Like that's how I felt about it, right?
Wow.
Like it's just the
means a
music
lot.
you wrote was something else.
Yeah. That means a lot coming from you. I think we have that similar David Bowie thing where we can't stay in our lane.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think you're a little more of a method actor. You know what I mean? Like you get when you get something in your jaws, it totally,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Whereas like, I'm a little bit more of a Philip Seymour Hoffman, where it's like, it's always Phil, but he can play so many different characters, but it's still Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yeah.
Whereas you're more like a Daniel Day-Lewis, where you like, or who was in Bill Skarsgård? Everyone's talking about him with the new Nosferatu. Anyways. But like you can really get into your character and like lose yourself in your character.
Yep.
Whereas like I'm like this broad, and I also appreciate the spiritualism that you mentioned, because I don't know, I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Like I'm I guess what you would call an agnostic at this point in my life. I don't want to. I want to keep the humility of saying I don't know, because who does, right? Like as you get older, like claiming to know that you know anything.
The older you get, the less you know.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a freedom in that.
Yeah.
But there's just something about music that, you know, Hendrix said when he was asked what his religion was, he said music. And I feel that to my core.
Yeah.
I feel a conviction to it because it's the only thing that makes everything else make sense. You know what I mean? Like, love doesn't make any sense until you listen to Leonard Cohen talk about it. Mm-hmm. And then you're like, and there's this uncanny thing that you feel like, I always felt that, but I never knew how to say it until you said it, right? Yeah. And that's what I love about music, is there's this uncanny thing happening. Because like when you write a song, or when you, whatever it is, if you start with like a guitar riff, or like lately I've been really into synthesizers, you don't necessarily know what it is you're working on. You're just like, it's happening to you, right? And then later on, once all the pieces are added, then you get to go, oh, that's what it is.
It's really weird.
Yeah, it's happening to you, and that part, and then you show it to other people, and they have their own experience with it, and sometimes it can be the complete opposite, and other times, like one thing that I find really interesting with the Cavernous is so many people have been referring to us, or like, oh, you must love industrial music, and they'll start like naming these deep cut bands, pocket bands of like industrial music, and I've never really dived into industrial music much. Not to say that I don't like it, it's never been my thing.
Yeah, it's never something I've ever dived into either.
It's something I totally respect, but it's cool because they're seeing something about it that I didn't know that I am drawing off of Skinny Puppy. I've never listened to Skinny Puppy before. And so I think with music, it's just so fascinating that all of us are just kind of like, whether you're the person writing the song or you're watching somebody perform the moment of writing the song, because that's what I think is kind of happening, like in creativity. You're just like letting this thing happen, and then when you record and perform it, you're reenacting the initial moment, and you're controlling it in a way that your audience can understand what's happening, right? But you as the artist are experiencing this kind of holy thing, like you're being taken over by something. Yeah. You can say like, oh, it's probably because I listened to this band and that band, but there's so much more to it than that. There's like your life struggle and what you're going through, and even deeper than that, I think, just like the Jungian collective conscious thing or whatever. But so you have this experience where you're the witness, and then you retell that story on stage and through recording, and then those people have that experience, and it's all out of our control. And so that leaves me with this really kind of, it feels mythical, it feels spiritual. And when I'm on stage, and when you notice, I really appreciate that you notice that about me, I am really trying to like surrender, and like, I'm not just playing the part, like this is happening to me as well. Yeah. And that's what's hard about being a musician, and what gets really grinding, and what people don't understand about it is like, when you're playing, like, I cannot imagine being one of these bands that broke in their 20s. Yeah. And playing those songs. Like, could you imagine, like,
30 years down the road, still playing the same song.
Playing that song, you know? I mean, all the power to them, and like, to make something that lasts that long, great. Yeah. But like, if I had to go on stage and get in that mindset of a song I wrote when I was 22 years old and do it sincerely, I might have to like just manufacture a character, you know what I mean, to make that work. And there's an artistry in that I totally revere as well. But something that I'm looking for is just that collision, that moment of like, this is real. And yeah, I don't know. I think I think that might be one of the reasons why I struggle so hard to get things off the ground. Is I think there's all these levels of local artistry that I've come to have a deep reverence for, whether it's that band, like I love watching a band take their first steps. It's like, that's the best. Because they have all these expectations. And but the fun of, and the real journey of being an artist is ego death, right?
Yep.
It's realizing that you constant, like if you want to keep yourself engaged with it, you have to be engaging on a different level. Like you have to be present. Yep. You can't just get up there. Like that's the thing. Like so many bands will like look at a band like say Nirvana, like, oh, that looks so, he's just playing 4 power chords. There's nothing to that. But then you realize like what that dude did to find that spirit that's behind those 4 chords. There's a special sauce happening there that I've lived my whole life wondering, you know? But yeah, that entranced thing, I remember I saw Tool back in 2001, and I wasn't into them. I didn't know what they were all about. I was like really into classical heavy metal, Slayer and Pantera and stuff. And my friend was like, "No, you gotta come check this band out." And I was like, "All right." And I'd heard a couple songs, and they were kind of boring. Like when are these guys even doing?
Yeah, like earlier Tool.
Yeah. And it was a Lateralis tour, and I remember watching them play, and they were playing like, I think it was like the end of the Lateralis song or the album, and there was 2 drummers on stage, and it's just, you look at what they're doing and it's just so encapsulating. But I came out of the trance for a second and I looked around, and I'm in the stadium with 10,000 people and no one's moving. Everyone is just like, they're in the moment, right? And I was like, I have been chasing that feeling for my entire life. From that moment, I was like, that's it. Those people they're not thinking about their bills that they need to pay, or, you know, or even like, you know, like I love a mosh pit. I think there's a zen of a mosh pit. I don't mosh anymore, but what a mosh pit represents.
Moshing at our age is a recipe for disaster.
It's not covered by workman's comp.
No.
But no, I actually went into the mosh pit this summer once, and I was glad I didn't. I'm not doing that anymore. Like, first time in years. But no, but going back to the Tool thing and like just the entranced thing, those people weren't even worried about like, oh, that guy's gonna hit me, or like they're not worried about the dance. They're just in the song, right? And like that's something I've been hunting my entire life, is just like the performer being completely lost and given to the music, and the people that are experiencing it are lost and given to the music. And there is like, that's the closest I've come in a sober state of mind to this purity that every religion promises. You know what I mean? Like they're all like, oh, if you just pray or you follow our rules, you'll get to meet the divine. That's the closest I've seen to us fracturing this illusion of separateness, is like through this communion of art. And it happens in film and theater and comedy. I love that one too. Like it's great when you see a fucking, pardon my language, when you see a comedian really like take over your mind for a minute and have that same thing that I'm talking about, that uncanny moment of like, I've always sensed that, but I've never been able to put it into words. You know, I love that feeling.
There's a weird epiphany moments.
Yeah,
especially with songs like Bob Marley. I can't remember quote for quote, but mentioned like when he writes his songs, it's not him.
Yeah,
and like Rita will vouch. There's a concert of Bob playing, jamming a couple days after he was shot.
Yeah,
and he completely, something takes over him, and you can see it in the video. It's quite incredible. But there's a lot of artists that say that they have this entity, power, some energy that takes over them when they're writing.
Yeah.
And they don't know where it comes from, like, especially with hip-hop. Eminem said it before. There's a lot of hip-hop artists, but it's just, like, as a hip-hop artist, when I'm writing lyrics, I have no clue what I'm going to write. I'm looking at a blank slate, and then all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of words, and I'm reading them, and there's a message there that I have no clue where it came from. And it's just, there's this weird, and then when you connect with people live, and they're feeling that too,
it kind of reminds me of, like, going back to the mysticism thing, like tarot card reading. The principle of it isn't anything deeply mystic. It's that they're using these archetypical images, and you look at a picture with say a skull on it, and it says death, and there's a number attached to it. But whether it's that number or the image of a skull and the word death, it conjures up all of these things in the person who's having that tarot card reading. So it's theirs and theirs alone, but it's this archetype, this thing that we all know, like the skull, death, the certain number, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And so I think the same thing happens to us as musicians and artists and such, that we're in the same human condition.
Yeah.
And so we build these things not knowing what they are, just knowing that we're entranced by what's happening.
Yeah.
And then, you're able to look back afterwards and like, oh, that's what I was. And like, I've had songs where I'm like, I still don't know what this is about. And then like 3 or 5 years later, I was like, oh, it was a premonition. Mm-hmm. Like I knew what was coming.
Yep.
And that's what's scary about it. That's why I get so tired with it, like, it's like, not only am I carrying this thing up the hill that's hard for people to understand right away, or that like I just fall way too into the abstraction. I think that alienates a lot of people, like what I do. I think I'm a little bit of a villain. I don't mean to be, but you've seen me clear rooms, like there's those 6 people who stick around and are like, what did I just see? But for some people, no, they're just there to see the dance, like the dance routine recited.
Yeah.
And I don't have a problem with that. There's bands and artists that they're really good at that. Like that's a whole other art form. Like I've been thinking a lot about like this whole gatekeeper concept lately.
Yeah.
I don't think it's as bad as people think. I think in the political spectrum, they used to talk about the right and the left being the gas pedal, being the left progression, blah, 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 and the conservatism being the brake.
Yeah.
And to responsibly look at, society, but like even in artistry, you need that dichotomy. You need those things. And there's people that hold the fort for things that are sacred about certain art forms, like there are metal bands that were like, metal was its best in 1986. And they hold that flag, and God bless them for doing so.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like we need those people to say, this is what it was, and we're going to do it. We're not going to change course. This was like really important, and we're going to hold, and then, other cultural things can happen around the people who hold that ground that can help it progress. And just like that, like just as much as we get mad at the gatekeeper for being like, no, this has to be performed this way, there's people more on, say our level or whatever, because we're talking about my level, where it's like, no, I'm going to turn the knife a little bit here, guys. Mm-hmm. And, but it's hard being that person that's being like, no, let's go, guys. Let's.
I think that's the point of an artist, though, because I think all major revolutions in the last 100 years were led by musicians, in the sense that you had the hippie movement, which was led by music. Mm-hmm. Everyone was one love. Mm-hmm. And then you have through the 80s where everyone was partying, and you had, a disco era. So like there's the evolution of humans. Mm-hmm. It coincides with music.
Yeah.
It's such a weird way that musicians can lead you down the right way or the wrong way more than I think most.
Like, look at the Kendrick Drake beef.
Yeah.
That is I was encapsulated by that this year because
Right.
it's exactly what we're talking about. It's one person being like, like let's just have fun and be, kind of on the surface about this. And then one person was like, no, there is a deep tradition of revolution in this. Mm-hmm. And you cannot just play these characters.
No.
You have to be you.
Yeah.
And of course I was on the Kendrick side, but ultimately I kind of understand you can't have a Kendrick without a Drake. Mm-hmm. You can't have a Batman without a Joker. Yeah. And so I do have this reverence, and I've learned this over time because there was a time when I was very cynical and I would just, they're not even trying, they're just getting up there. But then, I've seen these same people that I accused of being just encapsulate something that was lost in a specific genre, and they held it. Well, everyone else was moving on, and they were like, no, this is what this is. Like, I even have that, like, in my bluegrass days. I would get very offended when artists would refer to themselves as bluegrass if they had a drummer. That's a no. That's a line in the sand for me as a bluegrass musician when I was one. You can't, the thing that makes bluegrass is there's no percussion. Mm-hmm. The percussion is in the syncopation between the five musicians. Yeah, exactly. And that's the magic of it. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like at the age that I'm at, it's just like, I feel like I understand it all. It leads to more questions and understanding how I fit in, but I'm getting very tired, and just with everything that is called upon me in my life, as a caregiver who worked through the pandemic, as a first, responder, as a father of 2 small children, and as somebody who's making really weird, abstract electronic music. Mm-hmm. I'm exhausted. Like, these things, like when people are like, you do it because it's so much fun, right? Like, no.
It's more of who you are. Just, you can't stop it.
Yeah, there's a conviction. I think about a couple of different lines. I think about Charles Bukowski's line, like, find something you love and let it destroy you, right? Like, that's my life. Like, the things that I love are openly, like, my children are literally stepping on me.
Yeah.
And like,
no, it's true.
Dad, and like, my kid, like, like, kicked me in the stomach so hard that I like fell over the other day. Yeah. And like, but there's this thing that happens, like it's it just gets, I'm tired. I'm really, this time of year when I feel like I should be resting, and I'm emailing people about shows that
for next year, and
just like
yeah.
And even like, Christmas, like, Christmas is like this beautiful thing again. There was a couple of years where it wasn't. But with small children, I mean, it goes back to that root of
it's weird.
It's magic again, right?
It is. This year was probably this year and last year, probably the first 2 Christmases that since I was a kid, I was like, the magic was back.
And you get to watch it from the other side, and you're like, oh, wow. But you don't realize there's like a tired parent.
Yes. And then you start to relate to your parents.
Yeah. And isn't that great about having children is like, like that was the true test of adulthood, is having kids. And, growing up, you just find so much fault in your parents. And then you realize there was this person that was there at every beck and call to make sure that I became a person.
Yeah,
and no matter how flawed they were there.
Yeah. Well, they were learning be too,
here,
right?
You wouldn't be here if they weren't there, you know? And like, it's
we never stop learning, and that's the one thing, like, as we're growing, I don't think we realize is like our parents were in our position, learning still how to cope with the world and how to move through it as it changes. And like
putting those unneeded things, like you were talking a little bit before, like, oh, I'm so worried about where I am in life. And it's like,
I have this weird like complex in my head lately where it's like it's actually been an inspiration to write again because it's something I need to get out and in front of me so I can see it. But it's the older I get, like, should I be walking away from my dreams as a musician because it's what I love and have done since I was 11. I've been performing since I was 12, so I'm like 23 years deep of performing.
I think we got to make inventory though, because here's the thing is like when we were coming up, like there was no interviews, there wasn't even zines, there's nothing really online. There were a couple venues, and yet we thought we were going to be the next big thing. And now there's all the I don't remember these music festivals like Armstrong Metal Fest and Massive, and like there's all these opportunities and all these like places that we think we can get to, and like if we get to like opening for this bigger regional band, and we think there's these plateaus that don't exist. They're not. We think like, oh, once I play this venue with this band at this time, every time I come back to that town, it's going to be packed. Nope.
No.
It's
never guaranteed.
And so like we have to really monitor our visions of what success actually mean, right? Right? Like we have to, what is it? What will make you fall asleep at night and be okay with what you did with your time? And being someone that makes music that is always subversive and throws people off and isn't invited to the festival and then like it's backed by a loudmouth like me who should learn to be quiet and just, and I'm learning as I get older, like no one needs to hear what I think. Like,
I think everyone has their voice.
Yeah.
It's also, we live in a time where like you say anything and you can get in trouble for it.
Yeah.
Right? So it's easier to be quiet than it is to speak
Well,
your mind.
I think the microphone is out on louder, so you have to be aware that there's more people listening, and that those people might not be in a place to want to hear what you want to say.
Yeah.
And so this cycles back to my whole being like kind of a villain by accident. But you know, it's really hard for me, and I have to always take inventory. Like, why am I doing this? If I'm like, I don't have any expectation of any sort of grandeur. Now I'm realizing that it's more about. I think a lot of people want to jump on what other people are doing. Mm-hmm. They see success and they're like, I want to be a part of that. I want to go to that. I want to play that venue. I want to play this. I think the smart thing to do is to build especially when you're a person like me that does so many things that are kind of outside of the box a little. You have to build your own steps. You have to build your own way out of the canyon. You know, you can't rely on the ladders that have been set out for other people, you know.
Especially if you want to be an artist. Like, to be a musician is to understand music and play music, I think. But to be an artist is when you take it to the level of it becomes a livelihood and like who you are. And
the only metric is livelihood?
No, but like in the sense that like
see, that's what I wanted to spell is like I don't care about making the money. I think I care about building communities where people can do what they want to do, and there's some sort of like if we can get people out of the house and experiencing something that isn't in the zenith, you know, in the zeitgeist of like a moment that's really there.
Yeah.
I think we've done our job. That's a metric of success that I can sleep.
Yeah.
It's been a long time since I made money. Probably since when I was playing bluegrass. That's when I was making money, but I'm just not in that headspace anymore. And if I was telling myself, you know, the only metric of being a good artist is making money, it'd really get on top of me, I think.
Yeah. No, I mean livelihood as in like who you are as a person.
Oh, I understand.
Not like making bills, because that's a totally different thing. Because being an artist is one thing, and being a businessman or a businesswoman is a total different thing. And that's what ruins I feel that's the division that a lot of artists have is
Yeah.
they want to write what they love and what they're good at.
Yeah.
But to sell that, you have to be a business mind.
Yep.
And that's where
And that part is so exhausting.
it is.
And most people just become so apathetic about it, right? And like the artists that I've met, or musicians, if you want to use that dichotomy, whoever is using that creativity every step along the way, because you meet so many musicians, they write this amazing music, but there's nothing, like everything outside of it like doesn't come back to the same point. And that you almost have to think like in terms of propaganda, which gets icky.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
trying to convince somebody you need to experience this, like that's it feels like almost like coercive. Is that the right
It
word?
just feels greasy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
does.
it's like, and then you have that same thing, like, why am I doing this instead of sitting at home with my kids and my wife?
Yeah. I
You
think
know what I mean? Like,
I think when I was younger too, like when we were younger, it's easier to like go on the road and give up everything for the dream that you're chasing. And then becoming a parent, like being away for a week, that's hard.
yeah.
And it's like hard on the body too.
Yeah.
Like you're eating
Well, that's the
crap
thing.
food.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Like, it's really hard and
Yeah.
it costs a lot. And to like be able to travel on music while doing what I love, like that to me is success. And I feel like
Yeah.
that I've accomplished that for at least the last 10
Yeah.
years. Like whether it was traveling as a hip hop artist or with Storm the Empire, or like my success, I feel like my personal success isn't fame anymore.
Right.
Like you
Yeah,
said,
yeah,
when I
yeah.
was younger, it was like, I want to be the next thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we grew up with that cultural zenith, and that's what I
Yeah.
love about these kids coming up now, is they don't want to be the next Kurt Cobain.
No.
They just want to dominate their region.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the smart way to look at
Yeah.
it.
Because I mean, realistically, it's just 1 turns to 2, 2 turns to 4, 4
Yeah,
turns to 8. You know,
yeah.
like just focus. Like I have to say, like I've been last year and a half absolutely obsessed with NF, strictly because of what he says and how he
NF?
goes about it. He's a hip hop artist,
Okay.
and for a long time I haven't been able to say
Right.
how I felt.
yeah.
But there's an entire album
Yeah.
that he wrote recently that it's just kind of every song
Send it to
hits
me.
it hits home, right? So, but he doesn't cater to anybody but himself. You can hear it.
That's currency in this day and age.
Yeah.
That is currency.
And I think as an artist, that's what you need
Yeah.
to do. Is not be cocky
Yeah.
or egotistical about how talented you are, but understand where your talent lies and just full-fledged go
yeah.
with it. Because I think a lot of us growing up was our parents too telling us, like, if we wanted to be musicians, you had to have a backup. You had to have a backup plan.
Right.
Instead of just being like,
This is
follow
it.
your dreams.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
go at it full bore, which is where like as I become a parent and still being a musician and my kids growing up and wanting like playing around with music, is I want them to understand that following your dream is doable. You just have to go full bore like you would if you were going to school and you wanted to become an architect. You would spend how many years, or a doctor, right? Like most bands don't get picked up for 10 years.
Right.
There's like, if you make it to that 10-year mark,
Yeah.
you make it,
Yeah.
in my mind.
Yeah.
Because at that point, you've put in the legwork.
Yep.
And like, that's the number I've noticed. You know, like you'll see a band
Yep.
that's
No, I've
around
noticed
for
it
like
too.
Modest Mouse. We listened to Modest Mouse since I was easy grade 6.
Yeah.
So I don't know what year that would be. But Modest Mouse didn't get really big until after I graduated.
Yeah.
And like 8 albums later, they finally got picked up. And, it's
And how many members and transitions?
exactly,
Yeah.
right? So it's,
Yeah.
and before we've meant, like in an interview we did before, you mentioned like bands have shelf lives. And that's the hardest thing, is if a band locally can beat that 2-year shelf life, like they're legends in the scene.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You fail long enough to become successful.
Yeah, like then you're the top dog.
Yeah.
But it's weird
Because people remember the name. Yeah.
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 It's a really weird thing. So as, like we've touched base on a lot of it, but what in your time has been the biggest challenge for you as a musician personally, and what lessons did you learn from it?
Yeah, I think I kind of have been talking about it this whole time. Like, it's just like,
More
if
or
you
less to
want to,
be with
if
the
you,
band. Sorry, I should
no,
rephrase that.
as
It's
an
like,
artist, if you want to go against the grain, don't expect it to be easy.
no.
And I thought when you're, I thought being innovative was an automatic in.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. It's not at all. In fact, it's probably your detriment. There's going to be people who come up behind you that you've blazed the trail for that have a lot easier of a time.
Yeah.
You know, like, and it's not even you that blazed the trail. Like, you're just a footnote in something much bigger. But and barely a footnote. But for me, there's this cycle that I go through. I start a band. Everyone's pumped on what we're doing because we're doing something different. Okay, and everyone gets excited, and you get out there, and everyone's not on board yet. Mm-hmm. You're flopping. You're like, everyone's not ready for what you're doing, and you're not even ready because you don't really know what you have yet. It was like when we're talking about that formless thing that you're playing with, creating.
Yeah.
You know, even to present it, you have to learn how to present it. It's not just about making the thing. Okay, how do we show this to people where they get it?
Yeah.
Right? Like, for example, like with the Cavernous, I'll use the moniker electronic.
Yeah.
When people think electronic, they think DJs, dancing, good time. The Cavernous is not DJs, dancing, or a good time. Now, you know what I mean? It's the complete opposite of that. So as soon as somebody reads, oh, they're an electronic band. Oh, well, I don't want to play with them. We're a metal band.
Yeah.
You know, so automatically half your audience is like,
Yeah.
half of the people that would be like, oh, this is cool, are like, I'm not interested. You're electronic, right?
Yeah.
But no, so I start a band. We present it to the best of our ability because you don't know how to present. You think you do because of all of the other bands you've been in, but then you learn, oh, people aren't getting this yet. Okay. And then you work and you do all the not good shows, and both internally, like you're not really getting it out there the way you want to, and all the technical problems that come along with it. And then you're also having to convince people that they've got enough on their plate. The average person probably doesn't need a new band in their life, to be honest.
Right.
They're good. They've got their bands or whatever.
Yeah.
So, and then you get to this point where, okay, maybe you're starting to get attention and you're starting to learn how to communicate it properly. And, finally you release the album. That's always the tombstone. Because once you get to the point where you're releasing the album, you're so cooked.
Yep.
You're beyond cooked. You've been fighting with your bandmates and internally figuring out how to get this thing out through the gates. Yeah. And into people. And then you finally get it there. And once you're on that stage, you're just like, I really wish I was at home right now. Like, a friend of ours, Riley, he was talking about, he got to work with it. He's a audio engineer. He's working in a very prestigious studio in London, and he got to work with one of the guys from Radiohead. Yeah. And he's there.
Greenwood, I think it was Johnny.
No, it's not Johnny. It's Ed.
Oh, okay.
He was helping Ed. Anyways, he's sitting behind the console, and he's crying, and it's such a confusing feeling because he's both crying tears of joy that he's working with one of his idols, mm-hmm. but he's also crying because he just doesn't want to be there. He's worked so much and sacrificed so much, and so much got left behind for him to press record on it. Like, he's not even on the album. He's just a guy pressing record. Yeah. An actual liner note. You know what I mean? And people don't understand that about like what an artist does to get to that point where you didn't just create the thing, but you've communicated the thing and it's landed. and people are now consuming it, you know, and every time I get to that point, the band dissolves. All of us are just like, whether it's me or all of it, and then you've got that impossible process of being like, okay, do I start this all over again with different members, you know, and then it's the ship of Theseus. Do you know that old fable? The ship of Theseus is this old story, I guess, parable, if you will. I don't know if I'm using that word right, but it's like there's a boat, and you have to replace certain boards because they get worn out, and eventually you have changed every single board in that boat slowly over enough time.
That is not the same boat.
Is it the same boat? That's the question. Okay. That's the question you have to ask. Is it the same boat, right? And it doesn't matter if it's the same boat, if it's doing what it's meant to, right? Who cares if it's still the ship of Theseus? It's still out there or is it like, no, man, there's no, and that's going back to what we were talking about, how I've come to respect conservatism in music, when people are like, that is not the ship of Theseus.
Yeah.
That isn't what I started in, and there's something pure that I want to hold on to. I think about this most recent incarnation of punk rock. Punk rock's really interesting because it's reincarnated itself every time. Whereas, like, say the hippie thing, it really hasn't, or it's evolved so far that you can't quite connect the lines, right? Like the raver electronic person is almost...
I would say that's more like the hippie lifestyle.
Maybe, but...
Or at least the Woodstock lifestyle.
Right. That aspect of that counterculture, but it's strange with punk rock because every time it incarnates, it's very close to where it started. It's not exactly there, and I'll talk about what makes me mad about where it started that it hasn't kept. But it holds, like, it's very similar every time a new generation grabs it and says, we're doing punk rock now. Now, what I love about the counterculture of punk rock is what I find that I think teenagers, not to date myself, but I think teenagers grab onto punk rock and say, this will work because there's an aggression and a push that inspires them. Yeah. God bless them for it. Like I would say, like, I think the kids that I see in mosh pits today need a mosh pit more than any of us before. From the initial incident to the days when we were in mosh pits, those kids, like, they went to school through the pandemic and, like, sat on a tablet and lost connection with... Those kids need to be pushing each other around and smiling and screaming along with the chorus more than any generation before them. So I understand that, but the thing that I actually think is the nucleus of punk rock and why it's the counterculture method that's lived so purely so long is because it's actual freedom. The cool thing about what I consider kind of the initial incident of punk rock, or the proto-punk, is it didn't have it wasn't specific. You know, like, if you listen to the first Stooges record, there's psychedelic passages that are like 10 minutes long. If you listen to, like, the Velvet Underground, same thing. There's, like, these weird tension building moments that it's just like this weird cacophony that starts really small and gets really big, like walls of sounds. And in that same vein, you got Patti Smith, which, like, if you showed a kid nowadays Patti Smith, they'd be like, this is boomer music, man. This sounds like, you know what I mean? But no, she was like the godmother of punk, and but she would do beats. Like, she would speak spoken word in between her songs, right? And that's what punk was. It was like, or the band Television. Television almost sounds like early Modest Mouse or math rock even, So I think early punk rock was allowed to be whatever it wanted, and that's why it can kind of, like, people pick it up because it's like, yes, I'm young and I'm mad, you know.
I'm angsty.
Yeah, but I think there's something behind it that you can reinvent it so many different ways if you want to. You can be the Minutemen, or you can be Blink-182. You can be, whereas, like, metal, it's always been dark. It's always been like the horror music the horror genre for music, right?
Yeah.
It has, and that's why I respect people who are like, metal is this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So even though that is just not me. I can't wait for someone to come along and be like, baby metal, you know, or whatever it is, and like turn the knife and.
Yeah, there's a lot of. I think metal is one of the like genres I was talking before. It's like with Laura Lee from Down the Lees it's almost the classical music of today, right? Where they were doing it all by themselves, like the classical artists, right? Where their minds, but it's just there's something more to metal than there is about playing like 4 chords. I think there's just a different. It's a different beast.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm drawn to it as a musician. It's just if you want to be the Olympic athlete, metal is the Olympics for musicians.
Yeah.
Right? Like you want to be top tier, you're going to be learning blast beats at 200 beats per minute kind of a thing, right? So if you want to push your skill, you kind of inevitably drawn to either metal or blues. And
blues, really?
Well, blues guitar players are some of the best guitar players on the planet.
I agree.
You know, like you listen to John Mayer, you give him some distortion, and you're like,
fair.
Okay, I can see where it ties, but
I would say with blues, like there's that old joke, like what's the difference between a blues guitar player and a jazz guitar player? A jazz guitar player or a blues guitar player plays 3 chords in front of thousands of people, where a jazz player plays
thousands of chords in
front of 3 people, right? Like, So, but no,
I can be honest. Jazz is probably the only genre that I have not yet fully clicked with.
We should talk.
Except for like the Dave Brubeck Quartet, like. There's a handful of songs by them that I'm like, oh, I really like that.
Okay, so I would say you probably do have a toe in jazz. You just don't know it because you're a huge hip hop head.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, there's kind of
because there's there's a direct lineage between jazz to funk to hip hop, right? They're like you can like listen to BB like Bad Bad Not Good. They're Toronto boys, the quartet of. Jazz dudes.
Okay.
And their first record, they literally do the standards from Nas's Illmatic that he used. So you can
That's awesome.
bop along to, but they're doing the stand.
Cool.
You know, they're bringing it back. But no, jazz is my Everest. Jazz and classical are, I think, the Everest because, they're just like, there's something about them that are. Whatever crazy idea you have, I'm going to revolutionize music through this, I guarantee you some dude in the 50s playing jazz or even classical has already tried it.
Yeah.
Whether it's soundscapes or heaviness or whatever it is, I guarantee you they've already been there.
Yeah, jazz is like the science.
Yeah,
and that's how I look at it. It's like science, and then you have
the cool thing,
Olympic athletes, right? So like,
classical has this like rigid kind of conceptual thing, and I think jazz has more of this like what I'm into, that subversive thing. Like, we're not going to follow your modal rules here. We're going to twist the knife.
Jazz is like the ultimate punk because they don't care about rules.
Well, especially in the actual kind of physics and metaphysics of music. Yes, they're like literally, they talk about the blue note, like how to bend, they're hitting places between the notes that we could even describe, right?
Yeah, that's why I love like Arabic music. Honestly, like I find world music is probably one thing that I draw more to the older I get. Is like my next instrument I want to learn is tabla.
Cool.
Like
I've heard, like, didn't Danny Carey was like, the tabla will be like the
changes everything. Once you understand drums,
I need a whole nother lifetime for tabla.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing is like we're so like boxed into what like music is in the genres that we have, and then you go to world music and it's like we're naturally driven to drums, and I think as human beings with music being like the universal language, like I feel like if I was to bring my guitar to Africa,
I've literally had the experience that you're talking
about.
Right,
and you don't have to speak the same language, but you can just look at each other and you're smiling and there's this vibe going on, right? Yeah,
absolutely.
Besides math, I think music is the only other universal language, realistically, because...
And it's like mathematics, it would take a lot to discover the emotions behind it. I think there is emotions in mathematics. Mathematics got me through a lot of hard times. That's a whole other story, but I think music is like just right there. It just like is an emotional language, you know.
It is very. That's the thing, is I don't think there's actual words that can describe what you feel when you're in that state. Like I've tried to express it many times, and maybe in a different language, you know, not in English though. I don't think there is a word that can describe the feeling you get when you're in that spiritual zone and you're linked, and you're linked in with your band, and there's no one making eye contact, and no one's talking, and then all of a sudden you open your eyes and there's this euphoric sense that just comes over you, especially when you're with that group that just you click with.
And that's what's hard about this Ship of Theseus thing, is you go through this thing, you have that experience, you tell the story of that experience, which is a whole other journey of itself, and then you get to the end. And this is like when you look at album cycles of like huge bands, how do you recreate that moment? Lightning in a bottle, man. Like it's, and that's why, that's one thing that I really, once again, I take inventory of the fact that thank God I didn't break when I was 22 and I'm still playing those songs, because like that's afforded me the chance to just, I've been able to reinvent myself every couple years and find new people and name it a whole new thing and have a whole new journey. And I am, as hard as it is, that's the silver lining, is okay, where am I at now? What is the expression that's going to get me there now? You know, and that like, okay, I'm not, you know, I'm not making my living off of being a musician. I don't think the few times that I've had that experience, I didn't even like it. You know, like the few times in my life where my paycheck was how well I played, I started to really not like music anymore. And that was such a revelatory moment for me, because I think that's why someone like Kurt Cobain gave it all back, you know? It's like, oh, this didn't make me happy. You know, that's not the point of music. It's not to get to the zenith. It's that, oh, it's so cliche, but it's the journey.
Yeah, it is. And that's what I meant earlier about when you love something and you're passionate about it, it's different when you have to turn it into that business. Yeah. Right? Like, I took the last year off booking and festivals and shows. Like,
I noticed that. I've been meaning to pick your brain.
Yeah, everyone asked me, and it's because I almost lost my family because of putting so much time and energy into helping our community that my community was almost taken from me. And that was a huge eye opener for me. So like now the kids are older and I can do it, but I want to do it differently. I don't want to like book myself every weekend out in Alberta and all these things. Like I would rather just play big festivals. And that to me is way more of an experience, because like getting to hang out with the boys for a weekend and watch like 100 bands versus struggling to go to 50 different shows.
I actually picked that up off of you. You were starting all of these like festivals almost, right? Or these like, and I was like, that's a great idea. Like have multiple stages, do it every couple, you know, but
it just makes it easier.
Yeah. And then
instead of booking 10 shows over 3 months.
If I may play devil's advocate for a minute, the problem is you can't assume that you're going to be at that A-game zenith that you want to be when you get in front of a festival size audience if you haven't played those
build-up shows.
Yeah, exactly. You need to do those shows that you're allowed to kind of you figure out what's going on, right? With those new songs, you know, like where do they go in the set? What, you know, like you have to figure that out before you're playing in front of 200 people, or else it's going to get ugly.
Yes.
Like for the biggest learning curve for the Cavernous is gear. You've seen it. Like it's just a mammoth of gear.
I think it's for a lot of bands. Yeah. I think that's one thing that people don't consider is their setup and teardown time. and being a promoter, it's one thing that I'm like, I can get 18 bands to 15 minutes. Boom, in between, we got music going, right? And that's just my team. Like, if it wasn't for the team that helped me with those festivals, where I've got like 5 dudes taking the drums off alone and then 2 with guitars, like, couldn't make it happen because I'm running the merch and I'm running the door and
the whole festival.
And right. So like if my team,
if there's a problem happening, they're coming to you.
Yeah, and that's the one thing.
And so like, you can't be worried about
the little things or bands putting their gear in front of the stage and like
hurting cats.
There's gear everywhere.
Hurting cats.
No, it's definitely, and like we've watched the scene from like Stutterfly days.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And now like the guy I look up to is now recording the bands that are up and coming.
Yeah.
So like Jordan's Ukulele is like he's doing amazing.
He's killing it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's we were the young dogs looking up, and now we're the older ones in the scene. It's for me, I think it's we can make the scene the way we wanted it to be because we are the top dogs now. We have that ability to book the shows we want.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The lack of venues is the hardest thing.
I see what you're pointing to, and I 100% agree. I definitely put my hand where my heart is, or my heart where my hand is, if you will. Like going back to like helping out. Like some people like they've never said it to me, but I know they're confused. Like, why do you like book all these like
new bands
that aren't necessarily that good? It's like because they're going to get good.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And even if they don't, they still need a place to play. And that's where my heart is. Yeah. But I think, don't you worry about putting too much pressure on yourself? Like, we shouldn't look at it as what now we get to make it our vision. Like, I feel almost like we're working in a factory and like, we're like the foreman, like, oh no, machine 2's down. Somebody better get over there and go ahead and bring your tools. You know what I mean? It's not... Yeah. You know what I mean? Like we're not, when you want to talk top dogs, when you get to the top dogs, they're just people who care about money. Like,
no, I don't mean like top dog as in like, you're the ones that everyone's opening for. I mean top dog is like, you're the old ones of the scene who have watched it change.
Yeah.
And like, you can be the one who changes the faults that have happened. Like,
yeah.
Where like you said before, like metal bands are just playing with metal bands.
Yeah.
My biggest thing was playing multiple genres in on the bill.
Yeah.
Because you don't just put heavy metal blasting people right at the beginning of the night.
Right.
You want to drive people out the building, go ahead.
Yeah.
But you want to build up with the liquor drinking.
Right.
Like you start off a little softer, get a little more punk rock, and by the end of the night, everyone's a little drunk and they want to hear metal.
Right.
That's a good show.
Yeah.
For me, it's like it's dynamics, and like the scene itself has so much different music that just booking yourself with the same bands every weekend, Denenzies is not gonna do anything. You kind of gotta branch out, and that's where it becomes hard. It's like we don't have venues, and if you don't want to travel, how do you get out there?
Yeah.
And then that's where social media is a whole other element, right? Because I have a lot of friends who don't perform, but they're massive online. So I
struggle with that one. I want to talk to somebody, and like, and this when we were before the cameras were rolling, I was like, I want to pick your brain about this a bit more because I've experimented a bit. Should we close this up?
We got about 15 minutes.
Okay, perfect. I don't know, like my automatic instinct is that doesn't call to me because I don't have that person-to-person interaction, and I've experienced it where you like watch a little number tick up and you get that little like, people like me or whatever, but you know, and then I go like, but that's not the same because you're not sitting in the room with the person getting to have that sincere moment. But then I try and take another step back, and I'm like, you know what? People are still having the moment, just not in the same room, and it can still be meaningful. Like there's this riff wizard I know, and to be honest, he's not good at writing songs, but he's a riff king. Yeah. You know, he's just a riff beast, and he started a YouTube channel and Instagram and stuff, and he's just playing his riffs. So 30-second thing where he's just like doing that thing that he's really good at, like you said, and he's getting the interaction but he would never work. He's never worked out in a band very well because he doesn't think about what does this song mean in regards to the whole album and what does the merch say about our message. And that's not his game, man. It's just riffs, dude.
And that's what works, right?
And that I'm like, okay, there's something to this. Maybe you can cut the fat and find the exact thing.
Yeah.
And that part gets me off, and I've experimented with it a little bit. Like I have a podcast that's electronic music.
That's awesome.
From around the world that I just get them to like when the episode comes out to just get them to share it on social media, and then the numbers go higher, and we kind of share. It's just like sharing a bill, right? You're just sharing a podcast episode. But no, that was really it was a positive experience, but I found it like. Yeah, I didn't like maybe the odd message like, oh, thanks for including us wasn't the same as like, bro, we did it, bring it in.
Yeah.
You know, like the hug after the show. It's just, that might be where I'm the conservative, you know, like where I'm just like, that's not me. I don't.
Yeah, it's something I battle with daily is like, I hate being on camera, except for like doing this, I'm fine with. But like when it's like,
the talking head.
I can't do that. I'm not, and that's why being a front man is really hard for me. But there is something there, and I think that I just have to figure out where I click with social media versus what I have to do.
Right.
Like following everyone else's footsteps on social media, because a lot of bands I see just make gimmicky videos.
Yeah.
You're not focusing on their music. So like playthroughs is one thing that's very good, because you can watch a playthrough and you're connecting with the band still by watching their guitar player, but that's a niche market for guitar players. You know what I mean? So there's something there. I'm a very personal person. Like I like having, sounds really stupid and probably really bad, but I love when the set's over and I'm packing up my guitar, I'm sweaty head to toe, I'm panting because I just scream my lungs out, and someone comes up and hugs me, and I'm like, I'm sweaty, and they're like, I don't care. And they hug me, and they're just like, I want to be here in this moment, and I'm like,
they don't want the moment to stop.
And that to me is way more than a million views. And that's where it's like,
that's where it's not going to work for guys like us.
That's where it's like, I've got to find that middle ground for how to make that connection.
But maybe that's not your lane, you know? Like I think that's the cool it's such a weird thing nowadays, because when we were coming up, we all assumed that the point was to get to the zenith, to become the cultural ambassador, whatever. But there was no steps. There was no clear indication on how to get there. We were like, start a band and book a show. Like that's as far as we got. Right. And nowadays there's so many places you can jump and hats you can wear. And there's so many different paths, but there is no more cultural zenith to get to. So it's just like you're jumping in
pop artists, but like,
or I think the electronic and hip hop thing still has it, but
it's like for bands though, like there's no more Rolling Stones.
I'm gonna bring up something here that may be contentious. Whenever I bring it up, it's weird for people, and because you're a guitar player, you know, I don't want to, but I think what has killed rock and roll is the guitar. It birthed it. It gave it birth. It gave it life. It made it what it is. But it's the same thing that murdered it. Because and the reason why I'm in the Cavernous, it's an anti-guitar band because of the experiences I had through so many years. Is I wouldn't last in many bands that did this, but it was so rare to find players that didn't. Is if you, in rock and roll music, whether you're Bob Dylan or Eddie Van Halen, if you hold the guitar, you call the shots. And as somebody that was always relegated to bass, or I've played 100 different instruments, but I always found that so weird, because I always came to the floor with 1,000 ideas, and I looked at it as like I love that communion of like working together and like, okay, what do you think we should do? And like fighting it out and really grinding something into a, you know, something that you can all, something that you can all go, I built that, you know, whereas like so many metal bands that or not just metal bands, even folk bands, even every genre I've been in, if there's a guitar player in the band, it's this unwritten law that they're boss. And and that's why the Cavernous is what it is, because I need that fluidity to be like, to hear somebody play something and be like, oh, I hear drums and I've got a thing to do drums. Oh, I hear a bass line, you know, and then they can do that for me and back and forth, right? And I need that freedom to not just be like, I look at it almost like a producer, you know, like a producer is looking at the whole song, whereas like when you come from a song just from what you're doing, like the frequency spectrum that you're playing along with, it's hard to really see the entire vision. You're just thinking about what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people got kind of bored with guitar music is like it's all monolithic to the guitar. Whereas I think a band like, I'm not really into them, but I think why they're popular is Sleep Token. Those guys write songs, right? Yeah. They don't write riffs. They write songs.
That's like, I'll be dead honest. I've never listened to a Sleep Token song.
Really?
No, I haven't actually given them a chance yet.
There's something there that I entirely respect, but there's another part of me that grew up the way that I did that I'm just like, you kids have fun with this one. You know, it's great.
Yeah.
Not for me, but there's something there that is rejuvenating, and I think it's that they're writing songs. They're not writing riffs, they're writing songs, and that's why somebody's sister can be like, this is cool. And that's why I think Deftones is big again. They write songs, they don't write, actually no, they write vibe. That's what they do. They're a vibe.
Deftones are they're a whole other thing. I don't think there's like a word that can describe Deftones. I absolutely love them.
You wouldn't say vibe?
There's something about them. I think it's just right time, right place, and right group of people.
But they didn't even fit in with that.
That's
like,
what I mean.
You look at like new metal, and they got put into that, and then
they're not though.
Retroactively, you're like, they're not new metal at all.
They're like the Radiohead of the metal world in my mind. They're like when Radiohead went from playing guitars to writing Kid A and Hail to the Thief. That's Deftones of the metal world.
They just did that.
They do what they want,
as a career,
and what they make is what they make, and I think that's why people will gravitate to that.
There's very, very few people, and it's usually the old school metalheads that are like, yeah, Deftones isn't really my thing. But most people,
it's probably because I hate hip hop, and like there's such a hip hop element in Deftones itself. Like they have Frank, who's a DJ.
Yeah.
Chino was a hip hop artist before.
Was he?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
He does hip hop, and like so, like you listen to early Deftones, and he's rapping.
Yeah. Oh,
so it's like the evolution of how Deftones came from like their first album. To.
And yet,
Saturday Night Wrist or whatever. Yeah. Like it's a huge progression.
It is a huge, but then there's this, that's going back to that same thing that I was talking about with us. Like, I feel like I'm a little more like Philip Seymour Hoffman. They're like that. No matter what they try, there's still, it's not like, oh, who's this? Oh, it's the new Deftones? It's unmistakable the second you hear it. Even if this time the sequencer is louder. It's like, that's Deftones, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I say they're like a more vibe orientated than song orientated. But
I definitely think that their sound comes from Chino mixed with Steven. Like a guitar player, like Steven's writing, he's not look at me when he plays.
Exactly.
He's very how can we make this work together? And I think that's the difference between, like you said, like as a guitar player, like I don't like to be spotlight. I don't understand that. Like I feel super scared on a stage, but I love to put myself on a stage to feel scared because it's this weird love. Like it's this weird addiction that I have of just like wanting to close my eyes on that moment because I'm scared of all the people staring at me, but I want to present them this music. And
the trick is they're not actually there.
Yeah,
you gotta like, you can't win them over until you're at peace with yourself, right?
Yeah,
and
like the 5 minutes before I step on stage is like always the worst. You'll always
Really?
notice you'll never find me. I'm off in a corner,
Right.
like hyperventilating, and like
That's interesting.
Yeah, I have this weird like I just like need like 10 minutes to myself before a set just to like reel everything in and then hop on stage and throw down as hard as possible.
I don't get stage fright. I get gear fright. My anxiety is getting my.
It's gonna break down tonight.
Yeah.
Murphy's Law.
Well, I mean, I don't know when the last time you saw the Cavernous was, but it's just too much. Like we have too much going on. And it's like, it's always a half an hour changeover and there's so much and me pulling at chords and like not being organized yet again and like, oh, it's in the wrong. And that's when I'm just like, no. Yeah. But as soon as it's like everything's working, okay, hi everyone. Then I'm happy again. You know, like I've worked tirelessly for this moment, but the moment right before it, when I was like fighting with a patch cord that I didn't know wasn't working, that is me like having a mental breakdown. Yeah.
I think that basically sums up being a musician.
Yep.
Well, I want to thank you
for
doing this. This is I always love sitting down and talking to you, but it's nice like getting your different level than talking to other musicians. Like there's, like you said earlier, like you've got your own, even the thought process, the way you think about music, I think it'll help other people like hopefully understand why we are the crazy musicians and why we put ourselves through this. Yeah. Awesome. Well, we'll catch you guys next time.